Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Bright mini series of interviews with our Bright employees. Today, for our first episode in our series, we have our CEO, Gadi Bashvitz. Gadi, hello.
Hey everybody. Hey Akira.
Hey, nice to see you.
Dude, It's
Thanks.
been it's been at least a week since I saw you in person.
Yeah, Gadi and I met at B-Sides Las Vegas last week, and it feels almost like an eternity ago.
Yeah, it does. There's a lot of flight delays since then.
Did you have a good conference?
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was really busy, right? We had the two booths. We had the booth at B-Sides, we had the booth at RSA, and then sorry, not RSA. RSA was before at Black Hat. And
Mhm.
then I think I had 18 meetings in the 2 days separate from the booth. So it was pretty good.
All
Meet
right.
some customers for the first time, meet some partners for the first time. It's the world's starting to open up. It's exciting.
Yeah, it is good to meet people in person for sure, for sure.
Hmm.
So, Gadi, I'm curious. I want to just talk a little bit about Bright today. I want to hear about the kinds of problems that Bright solves, and I also want to talk about your vision for the company and for essentially what we can do for the developer-centric market. So, to kick things off, what do you think is the value of a developer-centric DAST like Bright?
Let's start with a business problem to address that, right? If you look at the market today and what's happening, and there's a ton of research that supports this, right, about 90% of organizations are knowingly releasing vulnerable applications and APIs into the market. Because by the time they detect the vulnerabilities and by the time they identify the vulnerabilities, with today's scans and the technology that exists today, it's just too late in the development lifecycle. And with organizations that have shifted into DevOps practices and releasing much, much faster, it just happens that they have to release. They don't have a choice. Right? And that represents a huge risk for organizations because if you're saying that 90% are releasing vulnerabilities knowingly, or vulnerable applications and APIs knowingly, that probably means that the other 10% are releasing them as well, but they just don't even know about it. So most organizations today, vast majority, are not finding vulnerabilities early enough in the development lifecycle and end up releasing vulnerable applications and APIs. What's the result of that? The result is all the ransomware attacks that we're seeing, and all the vulnerabilities and the attacks that we're seeing on organizations on a daily basis and are being published out there. And that is not good. Turn that into what's the value of dev-centric DAST and why are we focused on dev-centric DAST? The reason we're focused here is we looked at the application security market when we started the focus on this area about 3 years ago. And we understood that there's a big problem, a big gap in the market. Right? If you look historically, and I'm aging myself here, but you look 20 years back or 15 years back, DAST was the dominant AppSec solution in the market. Right? DAST was the number one tool because it's still out of DAST and SAST and SCA and IAST. DAST is still the only solution that actually looks at vulnerabilities as the hacker, as somebody would see them from the outside. All the other tools look at them from the code level, and that means that those are not necessarily true vulnerabilities that will appear in the production environment. Hey, so that's the reason that DAST was the dominant solution. However, with the advent of DevOps and people and organizations starting to release code much, much faster, which started 5, 6 years ago, DAST started falling out of favor because legacy DAST tools are targeted at the AppSec team in an organization. And that team is a very small team in comparison to the development team. So you can have a ratio of 1 to 100, 1 to 200, or even 1 to 300 between an AppSec person and developers. And then those tools were intended for a world and an environment where organizations were releasing once every month, once every 3 months, which meant that running a scan for 3 days was not a problem if you did it late in the development lifecycle, because you still had 2, 3 weeks until you released and you could remediate the issue. If you shift that into a world of DevOps, where organizations are releasing 100 times a night, which is what some of our customers are doing, Right? The AppSec team does not have time to do anything. They're not even part of that process. Right? And running a scan that takes a couple of days is just completely irrelevant. You're suddenly in a world that you have 15 seconds, sorry, 30 seconds. You have 15 minutes to run a scan. That's it. That's all you can do. Right?
Mhm.
So when we encountered that issue and understood that, hey, you know what, DAST, which should be the predominant way of doing AppSec, is falling out of favor because it becomes obsolete, we thought, can we reinvent DAST? Can we create a DAST solution that will start scanning very, very, very early in the development lifecycle? Instead of looking at pre-production or production, can we start scanning at the unit testing phase? Then scan again at the integration testing phase, scan again at the CI phase. Make sure that we're scanning in much smaller increments, dividing the applications and APIs into much smaller bits, finding vulnerabilities early on and enabling organizations to get that information around, hey, you have 100 vulnerabilities, but of those, 50 or 60 were found at the unit testing phase, which means that now you can resolve this issue within seconds. Because you're a developer, you get the information, you get the scan that was run as part of your unit testing. It gives you what is the vulnerability. You know that we validated that it's not a false positive. We give you proof of vulnerability and we give you remediation guidelines. It takes you 10 seconds, 15 seconds to resolve the issue. Whereas if you waited until you found this in pre-production or even worse in production, which is very common in today's world, it might take you 2 weeks to solve this issue. What happens to a developer that takes 2 weeks to solve an issue? The entire sprint they were planning is shot. And that's what's creating a lot of the antagonism between developers and AppSec, which we want to eliminate. Right? We want to help AppSec provide the governance. We want to have developers use the tools that have been purpose built for them and made for them so they can use them in an easy way early on, and then provide the AppSec team the ability to validate and verify and get all the information about the vulnerabilities that were found, about what was remediated, what wasn't remediated. Going back to my previous note, you had 100 vulnerabilities. 50 were found in the unit testing phase and remediated right there. Another 30 were found at the CI phase and remediated right there. That not only gives the organization confidence to release applications and APIs that are not vulnerable, which reduces a huge risk for organizations, but it's also a huge money saver because now you're not spending those 2-3 weeks on remediating an issue. You're solving that issue much, much earlier, which takes seconds. So it's a big impact on organization, and that's what developer-centric DAST is supposed to enable you to do. And what we enable you to do now, is our product today perfect? Not yet. Are we working though with some very large organizations and very large customers, financial institutions, large technology companies that are already utilizing the product, getting value, and we're constantly getting better? Absolutely.
Fantastic. So it's kind of like Bright is like almost like reinventing the DAST.
Yeah, I think the key thing there is I don't know how this happened, right? And some of us wrote code many, 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 many years ago. But for some reason, in the past 15 years, we've had this dichotomy where if it's a bug, right, it's the responsibility of the developer and the development team needs to solve it. If it's a vulnerability, it's the responsibility of the AppSec team. Right? That doesn't make any sense. A vulnerability is a bug. It needs to be the responsibility of developers. Maybe they need help to understand what it is. Maybe they need more guidance to understand the prioritization, etc. But it's still the responsibility of the developers. And that's why we need to make sure that we are reinventing DAST, as you said. So it's shifted left. It fits into the development lifecycle. Things are remediated early, and it creates much closer collaboration between developers and AppSec.
So shifting left is this term that we hear a lot in the InfoSec community right now. And I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit about the philosophy of shifting left? And also, can you please tell me how that fits in with Bright?
Yeah, we did a webinar, this is probably a year ago. I did it with one of our advisors, Omkar, and he used the term for his presentation saying you can't bolt on security. And shifting left means exactly that. You're building security into all of your cycles and into all of your processes instead of just trying to say, oh no, you know what, we're going to finish all the development and then we're going to run our security tests and see what happens. No, what we're saying is shift left means that you have to build security and AppSec testing in our case into the design of the application, into the unit testing, into the integration testing, into the CI, into pre-production, and into production. Right? And that means that you're starting much, much earlier. The reason it's shifting left is it's the further left you go, the earlier you are in the development lifecycle. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're able to build security or application security and API security into every step of the development lifecycle, that means that you've shifted it left and you're able to find these vulnerabilities much, much earlier and remediate them much, much earlier, which is very important.
Very good. So it sounds like this whole shifting left idea is really, really exciting. And a lot of companies are jumping onto this bandwagon. Is there anything else in the InfoSec industry that you are finding exciting right now?
I think there's a lot of interesting things happening. My personal philosophy is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you
Right.
look at the AppSec industry, and that's obviously I did not coin that term; it was invented way before me. But if you look at the industry in AppSec and where it started, and with firewalls originally, and then WAFs, etc., that is the pound of cure. Right? That is, we are already assuming or we're already admitting that we lost the battle, and now we're just going to put up as many walls as we can to block out people. Uh, I really do believe in that philosophy of no, let's prevent the issue
Hmm.
from happening in the first place and make sure that we don't have these vulnerabilities in our code, because any experienced AppSec person or red teamer or hacker or whatever you want to call them, it will tell you that a firewall is definitely not a hermetic block, right? It does not stop you from being able to exploit the application. The only way to actually be able to eliminate this is to eliminate the vulnerabilities in the first place. And that's why AppSec and doing AppSec right is so important. There's a lot of other stuff happening in AppSec um, and in cyber overall, but I think that's beyond the scope of this discussion.
Of course, of course. I have two more questions for you, actually. This next one is a little bit more of a personal question. You are
Ooh.
clearly very passionate about AppSec. You're very passionate about these issues. You're very passionate about like empowering developers to take this into their own hands. Why is that? Is there a story behind where this passion comes from for you?
I think that when I see things that just don't make sense, and I see the failures that they cause out there, and this
Hmm.
doesn't have to just be AppSec, but this is one specific example, and I know that there's a better way to do it,
Hmm.
and people are just, it's this. We've seen this with multiple prospects that we've talked to and multiple customers and multiple organizations where they just have a defeated attitude of, hey, we haven't been able to get the right solutions for the last decade. So we're not even going to try. We're going to try and shove some kind of IaaS solution in here, even though it doesn't make sense for our organization at all, because we've given up on SAST and we've given up on DAST, and maybe this one will save us. Right? And that's the wrong approach. I think that actually finding the correct solution and deploying the correct solution into your organization is the right way to do things. And that's why I get so passionate about it, because we know what the correct solution is. We know we can make these organizations much, much better. And again, is our solution perfect? Not yet, but it's getting there, right? And it can already solve huge problems that other solutions that came before us don't solve. So my message to our customers and my message to prospects and my message to partners is don't accept crappy solutions. right? Don't just have a defeatist approach that says, oh, there's nothing else we can do, so we're just going to throw a bunch of stuff on there and have a CYA approach. Nobody, if somebody doesn't know what CYA is, look it up. But we can't accept that. We need solutions that will actually make organizations better and will actually solve the problem and will actually make both developers and AppSec people happier. And that's why I get so passionate about it.
So it's like not only do you want this problem to be solved, you also want it to be done in a way where AppSec people and developers are happier, they're more fulfilled, they're able to work together better.
There's no reason that they continue having an antagonism between them. And if you talk to most organizations, you will see that there is antagonism between the two. We want to reduce that friction. We want to make that collaboration between those two teams much smoother, and make sure that they both have the tools that they need in order to be better at their jobs, and that will make them happier.
Beautiful. I think that's a great vision. I love that. And speaking of visions, where do you feel like Bright is going to go in the next 6 to 12 months? Can you tell us anything about your vision for Bright that you haven't already touched on?
Yeah, I think ultimately, if I look at, okay, what's success? And success is a much longer vision than 6 to 12 months, but what's success in the next 6 to 12 months? I think we have two things that we need to attain, or we need to reach. And that's where our focus is in the next 6 to 12 months. The first one is automation. Right? We're looking at very large organizations, okay, and we need to give them a solution that is automated, is easy to deploy, and can be used by thousands of people across the organization. Right? And that includes a lot of different components that are not easy with the DAST solution today, but need to be easy. So
Mm,
number one, the vision is, how do we make the solution much more automated, much easier to deploy, and much easier to utilize in terms of configuring scans, kicking off scans, remediating vulnerabilities, validating that those remediations have been done, etc. That's one. The second
hmm
one, I look more at the range of, or the category of visibility, and providing that visibility means that it's real ROI and impact for customers. If we can provide an organization a report that says you have 50 applications, or for some of our customers, 5,000 applications and APIs that we've scanned, right? Out of those, we found 500 vulnerabilities. Of those vulnerabilities, 70% were found at the unit testing stage, and almost all of those were remediated at that stage. And another 20% were found in the CI stage and remediated right there. And the other 10 were found in pre-production, but we had enough time to remediate those as well. And you've released an application or an API to production with 0 high vulnerabilities and 0 medium vulnerabilities. That's success, because now we're showing the organization, hey, you've been able to shift finding these vulnerabilities to much earlier in the development lifecycle and actually remediate them, which means A, we reduced your risk as an organization, right? And B, we made sure that you saved costs and increased the happiness levels between developers and the AppSec team. Right?
hmm
So that's the way I look at success, is really in terms of the ROI for our customers. The way to get there is through that automation, but giving them that report means that we're doing everything else right. And there's a lot of things that need to be done right in order to get to that report. I know my product team will not be happy with me just minimizing that. I understand how much goes into it, but I think that if we can get there, at least we know exactly what success is. And we know that there's a huge need for that for many, many organizations. As I mentioned last week, we were in Vegas at Black Hat, and I had the opportunity to meet with customers, meet with partners, meet with investors, and they all said, like, if you can do that, if you can solve DAST, which it really needs solving, then that's huge. And that's where we're going. That's what we're doing. Almost there, not there yet, but definitely there and already providing value to customers.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Gadi. We've been talking about DAST and the new era of DAST and how Bright is ushering that in. Thank you again to all our listeners, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks again,
Thanks,
Gadi.
Akira.
Mm.
Appreciate the interview and appreciate all the fun stuff you do on our DevRel team. Looking forward to seeing your webinar on the 24th, August
Yes.
24th. Be there, everybody.
Thanks all.
Bye.